Welcome to About Sustainability, a podcast presented by the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, IGES. My name is Andre Moda, and I'm one of the hosts of the podcast. There's been quite a bit of a gap since the last episode. This is mostly because of some simultaneous changes that have taken place here. One of our core hosting team and founders, Bob, has left for a new job after many years with IGES. Another, Erin, is on a year-long sabbatical in Fiji, and Simon, who hosted last time, has been on paternity leave until very recently. So I'm holding the fort for now, but there are also a few new colleagues who may take part as co-hosts in future. One of them is Alice Yamabe, a policy researcher from the IGES Unit on Sustainable Consumption and Production, and Alice joins me in this episode. She had, however, been working on an unrelenting meeting schedule when she took part, getting only a couple of hours of sleep a night. So I did most of the talking for the hosts on this occasion. Our guest is Akihisa Kuriyama, another policy researcher in IGES's Climate and Energy Unit. He joins us to talk about SDG7 on energy. We intended actually to tackle both SDG7 and SDG13 on climate action, but it turned out that there was too much to discuss on energy alone, so we'll leave SDG13 for a future episode. Even SDG7 covers a very broad range of topics, so we couldn't hope to be comprehensive, but we did manage to cover quite a bit of ground. If you find this interesting, please check the catalogue for episodes on other SDGs and additional topics. I started by asking Kuriyama-san to talk about the links between SDG7 on energy and SDG13 on climate.
So actually climate change happens because the societies emit GHG emissions, greenhouse gas emissions from our all activities, including daily life and also productions of manufacturing process and also transportation. So this is because our societies now relies on fossil fuel to manage our all activities. So then when we burn fossil fuel, so CO2 emits, then CO2 is one of the greenhouse gases. So that is a fundamental relationships between goal 7 and 13. So which means when we live our life, we have to use energy, and also we consume energy, then emit CO2. Then this cumulative CO2 affect climate and also cause climate changes because average temperatures of the Earth is getting increased owing to greenhouse gases. So this is a strong connections between goal 7 and 13.
And then just before we get into more detail there, can you just say a bit about the work that you're doing at IGES and how that relates to either of these goals or both of these goals?
Yeah, my work is related to creations of decarbonized societies. So decarbonized means societies without use of fossil fuel. So that means we need to create societies with mainly renewable energies. So first, I designed about energy system with massive implementations of renewable energies. And also energy system is a part of our societies. So when we introduce that decarbonized energy system, we also consider about our societies, including daily life and also productions of goods and also providing services. So therefore, all things actually related to each other. In that sense, when we designed decarbonized societies, we have to consider not only energy issues, but also our societies itself and also any kinds of social issues which need to be addressed. Yeah, actually it's a very broad topics, but we prioritize some issues, those issues, then we think about solutions for each other.
And Alice, I just found out a few minutes ago that you have also worked on decarbonization to some extent. Can you just say a word about how that, because it's so relevant here, just what exactly you've been working on? And you're from a different team entirely. Your main work is on sustainable consumption and production. So are you coming at it from a different angle?
Yeah, exactly. So what Kuriyama-san is describing right now as the societal aspect of decarbonization, this is what we work on. We work on how we can make the decarbonized choices easier to make for people, just making sure that there's social acceptance around the transition to decarbonized societies. So yeah, you can't just change the economy, change the energy, and that will allow us to mitigate climate change. And this is the solution. This involves, as Kuriyama-san said, it's a very complex issue that is intertwined with our lives. So we have to also propose services, products that allow for that sort of decarbonized lifestyles without marginalizing communities, without making the cost of energy more expensive. So I kind of work on that. We sort of conduct workshops with a lot of local communities, cities, so at the very micro level, and then we discuss with citizens what can be implemented in their daily lives and what are some of the barriers that they may experience in adopting such low carbon lifestyle actions. And so based on those barriers that they experience, then we discuss with the local government and businesses and see what sort of solutions can be accepted by citizens and can be implemented. So yeah, it's really interesting, but extremely complex.
Yeah, it's also, just as both of you are talking now, I was wondering whether I should ask this question now or later, but let me just sort of float it now and we can maybe get back to it later. But I guess one of the, especially with this relationship between energy and society, and both of you spoke about, kind of changing public attitudes, but that also relies on us being 100% sure that it's better to have renewable energy, right? And by better, that means not just for the long-term good of the climate, but also for the communities involved. And considering that at least in many cases, I don't know if it's most cases, this is not my field, but in many cases, it's going to be the cheapest and quickest and easiest way to get let's say, a community or a village supplied with energy is going to be to connect them to the grid, the fossil fuel grid, right? So how do you reconcile those ideas? On the one hand, you want to push renewable energy for the good of the climate. On the other hand, you want to get solutions to the people who need them most as quickly and as cheaply as possible.
Firstly, I have to say that using renewable energy does not always mean that independent of energies or securing self-consumption type energy systems or kind of isolated microgrids, something like that. So because renewable energy needs actually large scale of land. So when we install PV, so we also find enough land or rooftops. So in particularly in Japan, in city area, those land is not available. So in that case, you have to think about how to secure renewable energies within Japan. So definitely this is not from city area. So we have to consider about some local areas or onshore wind farms. That means that when we use renewable energies, so grids is power grids is one of the key infrastructures. So we don't need to consider about self-isolated or independent energy supply system. So we think about how to integrate self-production and consumptions energy as well as procuring renewable energies outside of communities or boundaries of system. So this needed to be in mind. So otherwise it's gonna be really expensive solutions to have a massive amount of renewable energies. Yeah, in particularly for Japan's currently discussions for offshore wind power is getting more activated because technologies about floating offshore wind is getting to be available. Many construction companies, not only power companies, but also construction companies have paid attention to invest that floating offshore wind power. Then power grid company also considering how to reform use of power grid, which can transmit electricity from offshore wind power to large power consumption area. Efficient. So that is now happens in Japan.
So floating, that means that they're not attached to the sea bottom. They're actually free moving.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's kind of using anchor, like a really long chain.
I heard, I'm not too sure about this, but I heard that for Japan it had to be floating because the sea around Japan is extremely deep, right? The sea level, I don't know, the ground under the sea is extremely deep, so that doesn't really allow the usual grounded wind power infrastructure. But what are the main barriers in implementing offshore wind power in Japan? Because I'm just wondering, maybe the fact that there's so many, that Japan is so prone to natural disasters such as typhoons or maybe tsunami can be a big issue for implementing such infrastructure at the national level.
So regarding barrier, so firstly, it's a still cost of offshore wind power plant, but the cost is getting cheaper owing to the technological development. And also regarding the depths of water, so you are right. So Japan have a really deep sea water level. However, floating offshore power, so it needs only kind of anchor. So it's relatively low cost to fix the floating offshore power equipment into certain part compared with sea bedding onshore power plant. Probably I forgot the proper English. Anyway, the cost issue is getting to be improved. Then next barrier is natural disaster. Actually, offshore power plant is strong against tsunami because this is a floating. So, and also tsunami, the height of wave is bigger when tsunami comes too close
to the shore.
Shore. But the height of tsunami is lower when
it's out at sea, right?
Far from shore. Just 1 meter, 2 meter changes, so it's no problem. And also regarding typhoon, it was already demonstrated that floating offshore power is enough strong against typhoon. So this is also not problem at all. And now current issue is probably consensus with local communities, in particular is fishery communities. So there's many bad experiences in Japan. So there was conflict between fishery communities and power communities. So now many NGOs or research communities respect to local communities' consensus. So they really take care about that community and also try to find way to create both benefit. So actually there's a benefit because when floating offshore part implemented, there is a kind of place where fish can
habitat, maybe?
Habitat. So there's a kind of co-benefit about fishery side. So then the power developers also provide those informations to communities, and also they assess how affect numbers of fish in those areas. So kind of those transparent communities would solve barriers about consensus on floating offshore power plant.
It's a really interesting example that I think it shows how diverse, we went down a very specific path there. we're talking specifically about floating offshore wind, and also specifically about Japan. Infrastructurally, a very integrated and connected society, right? So you don't really have, I mean, people talk about rural communities in Japan, but it's a completely different idea to what rural means in other parts of the world, because getting renewable energy to people simply means feeding renewable energy sources into the grid, into the existing grid, right? But then in other places, like truly rural parts of the world in Africa and Southeast Asia, for example, and again, I might be showing my ignorance here, but my understanding is that a lot of energy projects involve going to quite isolated communities and supplying them with energy somehow, right? Is renewable energy always the best thing to do, or is it sometimes better for the community if they maybe have a few diesel generators connected, or maybe connect themselves to a fossil fuel powered grid, a few dozen kilometers away or something like that?
Okay, so actually most of the projects that I've worked on were based in Japan, but you were mentioning the rural communities in Japan, and we did a project in Akita, in Odate, so that's pretty isolated, well, not isolated, but it's characterized as a rural community, rural area. And they're actually also trying to implement offshore floating wind power. So, but that's just the beginning. And I think when we were talking with the local communities there, they were mentioning that to still rely on fuel just in case there's a fear that if there's extreme cold season there's the risk that there might be a power outage. They need heat to survive. So then they might rely more, they find more reassuring to rely on the kerosene heating, I think, oil heating. And also just generally, I guess, the power system might be a little bit vulnerable to earthquakes in general in Japan. So maybe that's another issue, and people just find it quite reassuring to have just a stock of fuel or oil in their house. But I also heard that recently there were electric cars that were being promoted as like a big battery, a mobile battery that could be sort of linked with your house and then provide energy for a short limited time, but then it can still be used in time of urgency.
I can't resist kind of getting into one of the main things I wanted to ask now, and this is something that I really struggle to get any consensus out there. It seems like, so on the one hand, there's a lot of momentum behind renewable energy, and then on the other hand, there's a lot of resistance because of the argument is that renewable energy is, so solar and wind in particular, which are the two big ones, right? That they are both intermittent sources of energy. And if you have, now I'm thinking about not rural communities, but just society in general, and especially cities, actually. A city cannot function on intermittent energy, right? Because they have to have a constant and reliable power source. The one solution to that would be batteries. But as far as I understand, we don't have the technology to power cities on batteries yet. And it might be a very long time before we do. And then the other possibility is, and this is really just my own speculation, but the other possibility would be that everything is linked up, so that when it's cloudy in one place, it's sunny somewhere else. So another area is feeding into the grid. But then the distances could be huge, right? There could be hundreds of or thousands of kilometers even. How do we deal with the issue of the intermittency of renewable energy, especially wind and solar?
Yeah, that is actually key questions about renewable energies, and also our team working on that issues. And currently we have published discussion papers about the 100% renewable energies. You have to think about the intermittency of renewable energies as two categories. The first one is a short term of intermittencies. Second one is a long term or seasonal intermittencies of renewable energies. So actually countermeasures for both short term and long term are different. Regarding the short term of intermittencies, so there's a many solutions. So yeah, of course.
And so sorry to interrupt you, but just to define that, so short-term intermittency means like on a day-to-day basis, right? Like a windy day
or weekly fluctuations.
Okay. Right. And then the long-term means from season to season, like summer you'll have more sun than winter, for example.
Yeah.
Okay.
So regarding the short-term intermittencies, there are many technical solutions. So using batteries is one of the key solutions. There are many types of battery could be fitted into society. Of course, EV is one of the large source of batteries.
Electric vehicles.
Yes. Now, many business sectors consider about the integrations of use of EVs and power supplies as a source of flexibilities. And another technical solutions could be demand response of residential sectors, business sectors, and industry sectors. So there's many types of demand responses. So regarding household sectors, for example, in the house with hot water supply system by heat pumps, that system has a hot water tanks or hot water storages. So which means that they can heat up water when renewable energy is available. Then that water used for any time. So which means that the hot water can be
acts like a battery, basically, right? It's storing energy and releasing it later.
Yes.
I heard recently about, there's some blue sky thinking and blue sky innovation going on in this sector. And one of the ideas, I don't think it's actually been tried on any scale, but they were talking about having it was like a giant tower, building a giant tower and putting something heavy at the top, using like solar power to get something very heavy to the top while the sun is shining. And then when the sun is not shining, you let that thing slowly drop, so that it creates its own energy, that sort of thing. So that whole battery idea or kinetic energy storage idea is a really interesting one.
Yes. Yeah, probably those are kind of storage type demand response, I would say. So this is can be kind of demand response without compromising services quality. But probably when we consider societies with large amount of renewable energies, probably we need to consider about other type of demand responses, such as which changes our consumption patterns, including energies and other services. Probably our societies relies on stable energy supplies by fossil fuel. So this is a kind of basis of our society. Then many services are developed based on stable energies, but renewable energy is not stable. This is a kind of fundamental characteristics. Our society need to be adjusted or transformed to societies with intermittent renewable energies. So some part of our society could be adjusted as the patterns of renewable energies. So this is a really kind of advanced demand responses. So then we can reduce amount of batteries, and also we can reduce amount of fossil fuel supplies by gas or coal-fired power plant. So that could be also really interesting topics when we live with renewable energies. So of course, if our behavior is not changes, probably that advanced demand response is not possible. But if we can change our minds or rules or regulations, probably it could be possible.
I find that really interesting, and I was wondering if you knew if that was an idea that was currently sort of talked about, and if there were concrete ideas on how we can adjust our society to more intermittent renewable energy sources. Maybe the current technologies that we have partly already trying to be as efficient as possible, or we use most of our products at home during the day, so it's already pretty intermittent. Like, we're not always active. So would that be like a more structural way for us to live with the intermittent sources of energy, where we would be told, okay, like during the day, try to do as much as you can of your daily activities, and then at night, actually, that's just a natural cycle for anyone. So I don't see how that would actually go against the way we currently live.
Yeah, I guess the thing is that, like, I'm just constantly aware of human nature and how rigid it actually is and how difficult it is to change. Human nature and habits and our, I don't want this to sound negative, but our addiction to all of the luxuries and the comforts that we've created for ourselves. It's very difficult to break away from that. And I was kind of wondering, just sort of leading on from what you were saying, Alice, I mean, one question could be a question to you, Kuriyama-san, which do you think is more likely, like in the next 20 years, let's say, is it more likely that we'll be able to change attitudes so that people adjust their lifestyles like that? Or do you think it's more likely that we develop, let's say, battery technology that is capable of storing renewable energy, intermittent energy, so that it can power cities? My personal opinion is that, sure, I mean, I think innovation is at the heart of this. I think you have to innovate one or the other, either innovate batteries to that extent or innovate ways of influencing human behavior to that extent. But human nature is a powerful force.
Yeah, at least I'd say that we can foresee technological development. So probably for the advanced demand responses, key technologies would be predictions. So, for example, weather forecast. So we can foresee that more accurate weather forecast.
Much better than it used to be. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, probably our energy consumption pattern could be more, data-ized. In Japan, actually all houses are installed so-called smart meters. Actually, data is getting to be accumulated into power companies. Then probably 5 years later, that data would be available for public people. Then in that case, prediction about energy demand patterns also more sophisticated. So then when we see matches between energy supply or electricity supply predictions and demand predictions, so we can allocate source of new energies into societies more efficiently. So in that sense, advanced demand response would be more sophisticated business models because utilities of energy consumptions are different by person to person. So someone think about, okay, I can shift this task to tomorrow because it's not urgent matter. So then I can do it when energy is available. So if that person can do that, that advanced demand response would be also possible. So therefore, this innovation is not only our psychological issues, but also about technological innovations as well. So then that is why it's really difficult to forecast, actually.
Right.
Just thinking about the use of nudges in sort of directing people's behavior. And so you were talking about how we could use data of our energy consumption in order to better predict our energy use, but also we've been working at the moment on behavioral insights and how maybe social norms around our current consumption patterns can be influenced by little nudges. So, for example, for our energy consumption, if we have actual information on how we compare our energy use compares to our neighbors or to to the local average energy use, that can also be a sort of trigger for a lot of people to either diminish or just switch around their energy consumption in a way that is seen as the norm. Of course, we have to keep on investing into new technologies, because there is a limit to what we can do in improving our the efficiency and reducing our energy consumption without actually having to sacrifice too much on our comfort and convenience. But at the same time, there are some things that can be done, maybe that are still not being implemented enough. And so, the more we get that data, the more we can have a sort of awareness. But also at the same time, we're so flooded with information in our everyday life that there is also a limit into how we can actually take into account every aspect of our consumption and all the sustainable impacts that it has.
Yeah. But that's a great example of going with the flow of human nature, because we are societal beings, right? So, and I know there have been a lot of studies showing how incentives which take into account our desire to be a part of society and to kind of more or less go along with what other people are doing can be a very strong trigger or nudge, as you put it. Kuriyama-san, sorry, did you want to respond further to that? If not, I have a completely separate question, but please go ahead.
Apparently, I didn't make answers for long-term intermittencies. So,
right, sorry.
That part actually, compared to short-term intermittencies, we don't have enough ideas about that. That is actually our realities. We could be anyhow relies on fossil fuel, or for the regions with plenty of biomass resources, so that region could use biomass resources. And also, if there is plenty of renewable energies, so they can store renewable energies as hydrogens or other types of fuels. Then renewable energy is not sufficient compared to energy demand, then the system will use that stored energies. Anyhow, we need certain amount of stored energies.
So the technology for hydrogen, the technology is simply in an early stage now, right? So So just one word on biomass. So this is probably the renewable energy source I know most about, because it relates quite closely to biodiversity in many contexts. So I'm not suggesting that it's not an option, but it does present quite big challenges to land use, because the land which is used to produce biomass for energy could be used for food production or biodiversity and other things, and it takes a lot of land to produce it. I know that sort of maybe 20 or so years ago, or maybe more like 30 years ago, everyone was very positive about it, and then everyone got a little bit worried about those aspects. But I didn't want to get into that too much. I also just wanted to mention, we can't sort of not talk about nuclear energy in a podcast that's about energy and climate. My understanding, and again, it's very limited understanding, but my understanding of nuclear is that the safety concerns of nuclear are less serious than they were made out to be in the 80s and the 90s, but they still exist. They're not zero. The technology has become better, but because of the kind of public resistance to nuclear, that has really slowed down the technological advancement of nuclear energy. So nuclear remains an option, but it would be a much better option even if we put more more focus on innovating and improving it. But at the moment it's quite expensive. It has other issues attached to it. So that's a long way of saying, asking you, Kuriyama-san, especially, but also you, Alice, if you have any thoughts on this. Is nuclear, should that be part of this equation or not?
Yeah, that's also really challenging questions. So regarding the climate change issues, there's a timeline. So you have to be making net zero societies by 2050. So this is a really strong constraints.
It's got a limitation.
Limitations. In that sense, so if we invest nuclear power plant, so anyway, in that case, we have to invest kind of conventional or current types of nuclear power plants. So that is a reality when we see about 2050 net zero. So then when we talk about the cost of current type of nuclear energies, the cost is getting higher and higher owing to, as you said, the securities requirement.
Regulatory requirements, right, have just become make it more difficult to develop those technologies or put them into practice.
On the other hand, we can foresee that the cost of renewable energy is getting cheaper and cheaper until 2050s. So when I see those two situations, so investing renewable energy is much more attractive than nuclear energy. So this is my feelings. And of course, when we see about 2080s or 90s, we would be available about new types of nuclear power, including fusion, nuclear fusion. So in that case, we should not limit on the choice into energies. So, but it's a really long-term strategies to have new types of nuclear power. So anyway, you have to think about time scale of availability of those two technologies. That is my opinion.
Yeah, you were talking about the development of nuclear, but I think for maybe developed countries, this is something that can be considered where we have more the capacity to develop that as well as the financial means to. But these are really costly and technical to put in place. So I was wondering what is the scenario for a lot of developing countries as they are developing their economies, industries. What do you think should be the reliable source of energy to be implemented large scale?
Can I just quickly jump in? Sorry, I know you were asking Kuriyama-san, but it just made me think. I grew up in Cape Town in South Africa, and Cape Town is an anomaly. It's unusual in South Africa. It's unusual in Africa in that it's powered by nuclear energy. But there's a nuclear power plant there that's been going since I think the 70s. So it's really old technology. So it just makes me think that if we had continued investing in nuclear energy to the same extent that we were investing in fossil fuels, then by now we would probably have much better nuclear energy than we have. And I should also just mention that when I say nuclear energy, I mean fission. Everything so far has been fission energy, right? With all the waste related issues that it carries with it. And Kuriyama-san was mentioning fusion. I don't know much about this, but my basic understanding is that all nuclear energy that's been used so far has been fission energy, which produces waste. And fusion is something which they're making breakthroughs, but on a really experimental, tiny scale so far. And if that can one day be produced at an industrial scale, then basically all of our energy problems are solved. But there are huge challenges, huge technical challenges to that goal, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But Alice was asking about whether you were talking about nuclear energy in particular, right? So fission energy and whether that's applicable to developing countries, and if not, then what's their best option?
Yeah, actually that is out of my expertise, but at least I can say that to install nuclear energies, there should be good governance to operate nuclear energy. So it's really big facilities, and if something happens, the impact is really big, and also long-term impact remains. Therefore, nuclear power does not allow any mistakes. So that means that operating nuclear power is really needs good governance as well as transparent framework. So I don't say developing countries does not have that capacities, but even in Japan, the issues of governance is really key or high concerns about it. Therefore, when we install technology of nuclear power plant, we have to consider not only technological points, but also those governance issues as well.
So if nuclear is difficult to implement everywhere, then what is the good energy sources might be my question. Where I guess it depends on every national circumstance and what resources they have.
It must be to some extent, right? Because, I mean, if you think of a country like, I mean, okay, this is, again, a bit of an anomaly, but a country like Iceland, I think already is almost entirely run on geothermal energy, right? That is an unusual example, but then some countries get a lot more sun than others. Some countries get a lot more wind than others, you know, whatever. There's different possibilities, I guess.
Yeah, regarding the Asian countries, so at least I know that less wind power potential and high solar potential. And also Asian countries compared to Japan, the temperature is kind of stable and also warmer than Japan's average. So in that case, they don't have large amount of consumptions for heating buildings. So electricity consumption pattern is also different. So in that case, so solar PV could be really competitive options for that countries. I feel I don't know exactly detail, and also developing countries infrastructures of power grid is not so developed. So in that case, kind of mini grids or role of mini grids or microgrids is more important compared to Japan. So in that case, PV plus battery system would be competitive. So
what does PV stand for?
Photovoltaic.
Okay. Photovoltaic. Okay, I see.
Yeah, and also regarding the residential sector, so that kind of system, so PV plus battery have a really great potential. But when we consider about industrial energy demand, story is different. So probably PV output from PV is too weak or too small. So we have to consider alternative new energy sources or other energy sources without carbon.
So, you know, society has been on a mission to support renewable energy for a long time. Do you think that the SDGs, which have now been going for, how long has it been now? 8 years. Has that made a big difference? The fact that there is an SDG on energy and an SDG on climate, does that make a big difference to the political scene and the general global ambition, you know, to make these things happen?
Yeah, it's impact on the people's awareness about renewable energies. So before SDGs, so renewable energy is one of energy sources. But when the people says about SDG goals, so renewable energy is more kind of close to our daily life. So people tends to consider about how to utilize renewable energies into our life and also how renewable energies would bring benefit into our society. So people start considering the meaning of implementations of renewable energies, I guess. And also people think about what is a clean energy. I think before SDGs, so clean energies includes both nuclears and renewable energies. And then after SDGs, so people think about not only energy issues, but also people think about social issues. So in that case, renewable energy is different from nuclear energy. So actually both are different types of energy. Then they are considered as pros and cons of two separate energies. That is a kind of big changes, I feel.
I know in Japan, there's been quite a lot of effort at the national and subnational level to promote the SDGs. So I guess that not just energy, but the SDGs in general have been, used as quite effectively as a tool to raise awareness about sustainability in general. How is the region, the Asia Pacific region, more broadly doing on SDG7?
Also difficult to answer, but my hypothesis is that people thinks about more energy independent. In Asian countries, many communities consume fossil fuel, which imported from other countries. So which means that they need to always pay to bills for energy to other places. So then if renewable energy installs, they can change monetary flows into rural communities. So that would be also a big benefit of renewable energies.
So you're talking about Asia in general. Are you saying that Asia in general is importing a lot of its fossil fuel?
Yes, in largely speaking, yes.
Okay. That's mostly, I don't know, but is that mostly within the region? Because I know China is a very big coal producer, for example, right? And then of course the Middle East is a very big oil producer. So, but you're talking about across national boundaries, but maybe within the region, like between countries within the region. Okay.
Yeah, of course, realities are more complex. So, for example, Indonesia also have plenty of fossil fuel resources, and Vietnam, they have coal. But sometimes that fossil fuel is a resources for getting foreign currencies, not for residential
domestic
powers. So actually, sorry, the complex. But anyway, for residential perspective views, so they can change monetary flows into more keep those monies into communities. For example, when they install PVs, of course, there's some maintenance works required. So then they may hire some persons, but the persons are from communities. So which means that they pay monies for that rural communities. Then if global crisis happen, then energy prices suddenly higher. So the communities keep securing energies as it is. So I think those benefits of renewable energies can be recognized by those SDG target, because SDG is a very comprehensive and integrated approaches to consider our societies or lives. So then SDG7 is particularly renewable energy is one of the SDG targets. Then people think about how renewable energies contribute to our life, not only energy issues, but also other issues. So this is a kind of big change of framework.
Looking at the relationship between SDG7 and SDG13, is there any trade-off between those two SDGs? Because as countries, for example, in the region, improve their energy capacity, then that's also has the potential to contribute more to climate change, right? So as long as they're working towards clean energy, then it's not. But if you're only focused on energy production, then of course there could be consequences for climate change, right?
Yeah, I think there's also trade-off. So because one of the goals of SDG7 is access, right? Affordable energies. So in that sense, if speed of renewable energies speed of implementing renewable energy is not first, so they have to rely on other source of energy. So in that case, fossil fuel is one of the key options to secure energy access. So then in short term, actually in developing countries, still there's many plans to construct fossil-fired power plants. So this is because they need to access to energies. So therefore, they need to develop new thermal power plants. So that is actually reality. So there's a trade-off between goal 7 and 13. And also discussions between SDG7 energy issues and SDG13 climate issues. So actually, there's a long-term discussion, and also therefore many researches have already done. But those researches relies on kind of energy system models based on the cost optimizations of energy systems. So in that sense, one conclusion is it is efficient to keep kind of centralized system than just switching to fossil fuel to kind of new fuel without CO2 contains. Or using fossil fuel with carbon capture and storage techniques. So that kind of answer would be easily concluded if we using current energy system model. But when we see SDG7 as a kind of one of the target of all SDGs, we have to expand the scope of discussions about energy.
Thank you for listening to About Sustainability. Please subscribe at podcast.iges.jp or search for About Sustainability wherever you normally get your podcasts. If you've got feedback, you can review us on your podcast directory of choice or reach out on Twitter at IGES_EN. About Sustainability is produced by the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. Any views expressed during the podcast are those of the speaker at the time of recording and do not necessarily reflect the views of IGES. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. We don't take that lightly, and we hope you'll join us next time.